more than 10 years ago, I advanced the theory of narrative, which changes the nature of the game. And if people accept it, it does something interesting. I've decided that, after long thinking about it, that it is better to think of narrative and story as two separate cognitive modalities, which are often intertwined with each other. And then I define story as a sequence of events and parts of events that lead to a significant transformation. So it's entirely a plot-driven style. And this is what almost all the critics and theorists talk about, is plot. Whether it's Roland Barthes or you name them, they're only interested in plot. And it seemed to me that I was interested in narrative in a way that they weren't. They seemed to help useless to me, Todorov and Barthes and family, that I wondered what it was that got them to deal only with the mechanic, like a Boccaccio's story treated as if it were an O. Henry story. Everything going on, twists of a kind of logical and slightly surprising sequence. And I tried to examine what I meant, and what I thought I meant was central to all things I called narrative. It seemed to be they were those engagements of a desiring subject with the threat or promise, or threat and promise, of a transformation that this person or group of people, usually this person, would try to either bring about or to overcome and prevent. So if the storyline is essentially the external shell of narrative, and that narrative is the subjectivity confronting transformation, either positively or negatively, you're dealing with two different things that may be found together, but they may also not be found together. They may be found distinctively. For example, if you read a crime story in a daily newspaper, usually the crime story has been gotten from the desk sergeant, and who has taken the account of several witnesses and synthesized their account of what happened. And their accounts of what happened: a man came into the store with a drawn pistol, threatened the man at the register, the cashier, ran off with $25. That was all that was in the till, and disappeared into an alleyway between two slum buildings. Now, this was probably the result of several different witnesses' accounts, and nobody's desire is really given. That is, there's no subjectivity at all in the account, because there's no subject. Subject in the sense that there's nobody experiencing. Nobody's desire is central to the shaping of the representation. And I said to myself, well, Freud has a case against narrativity in dreams, let us say, which interested me. It's a case against plot. That is to say, we have dreams, and he thinks the dreams are not narrative at all. His interpretation of dreams, published in 1900 and had been worked on for 5 years, was part of an attempt to buttress his theory that there is some cogitation of a deeply emotional and free-thinking nature below the level of our awareness that he locates hypothetically in a place called the unconscious. And the system from which he draws the evidence that there is some thinking going on that is not conscious thinking, he draws from essentially from dreams. He draws them from legends, myths, and he draws them also from slips of the tongue. In the psychopathology of everyday life, he's dealing with errors made by people where they say something that they probably didn't want to say by what appears to be by accident, but which looks like the intervention of some demonic other who's making you say what you don't really want to say in public, but what you might very well think. So I began to ask myself, there's something strange about Freud's work. One of the things is he has a commitment to, which puzzled me at times, the notion, he insisted that all dreams are wish fulfillments. And this is the weakest spot in his theory of dreams, because as many patients pointed out to him, what about my nightmare? And the nightmare, he would say, well, the nightmare is really you're completing your wishes, as it were, to prove me wrong. you're fulfilling your wish to prove me wrong by demonstrating a dream that's not a wish fulfillment. So it's a wish fulfillment by not being a wish fulfillment. This didn't seem to me too clever an idea. And he's often been accused of being unscientific by proposing absurd answers like that in defense of his theory. But and it struck me that there is a different way to think about this. I think that he's right if we back him off his hyperbole. See, psychoanalysis is filled with hyperbolic thinking. If we back Freud off the hyperbole and say that all dreams are invested with desire of some kind or another, and let us imagine desire being a linear vector having two ends. For the sake of oversimplification, imagine it as a linear vector that can be directed toward one end of the vector or the other end of the vector, which would mean that it would pass through the origin and be a negative vector. Like a dream that was a nightmare would be the negative form of desire. It would still be desire, but it would be the negative form of desire. And it strikes me it is better to think of desire having a negative form and a positive form, although it's more complicated than that. But in the greatest simplification, all Freud had to do was say the dreams are in fact always in a sense carried by some kind of desire. But that's